From darkness to light, this is the story we all share as the people of God. He draws us out to draw us in. From the birth of Israel to the church today, God delivers and dwells with his people. He draws us out of our sin, our Egypt, and draws us into his presence, into relationship with him.
Good morning. So what kind of endings do you like? You know, movies, books, shows. Happy ending people? Who are the happy ending people? Who likes a nice, sad, poignant ending with tears? There you go. Do you like the abrupt ending where it just ends and you're like, okay, wait, how did that all come together? Or do you like them to kind of extend it and pull all those threads together and tie the bow? What do you like? Anybody like the complete plot twist? Like in the last 3 minutes, everything you thought was gonna happen just totally doesn't happen. You're like, what? And you have to start back at the beginning. I am a total happy ending person, but I am not just a happy ending person. I am a happy ending person with an epilogue and an afterward and a sequel, please. Because I don't just want to see the hero win. I don't just want to see them get together. I want to see like the next 50 years and like how everything lives out, because I get really attached to my characters. And so we're at the end of Exodus. How does this book end? We've done 8 sermons. You might not have been counting. We've been counting. We've done 8 sermons for 40 chapters. So needless to say, there's a lot more in Exodus. You can keep going back to Exodus. But we're going to be in chapter 40 today to see how and maybe why and where this book ends. So Exodus chapter 40, we're going to start at verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, set up the tabernacle, the tent of meeting, on the first day of the first month. So let me stop there for just 1 second and say 2 things. Number 1, this whole tabernacle, tent of meeting, sanctuary, it gets called a couple of different names throughout the book. God has actually been talking about this thing since chapter 25. Chapters 25 through 40 focus primarily on details about the tabernacle. And I'm not going to take you through all of those today, but oh man, there's some neat stuff in there. The second thing I want to show you is that this is happening on the first day of the first month. And if you remember back from the Passover happened on the first month. So we came out of Egypt on the first month, and now we're like almost a year later at the end of the book of Exodus. Okay, keep going. God's still talking here. Place the Ark of the Covenant law in it, ... God's telling him all the things he's supposed to put in it, which he's been talking about since chapter 25. Moses did everything just as the Lord commanded, ... because Moses then does all that stuff. And so Moses finished the work. And now let's go to verse 34. Then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. Moses could not enter the tent of meeting because the cloud had settled on it, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. In all the travels of the Israelites, whenever the cloud lifted from the tabernacle, they set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out until the day it lifted. So the cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night in the sight of all the Israelites during all their travels. The ending. It's interesting because it might not feel like a big moment. I mean, when you think back to the plagues and the Passover and the Red Sea as God is delivering them from bondage, Or even if you think back to when they first got to Sinai, they're still sitting at Sinai. When they first got to Sinai and they met God for the first time, and God revealed himself in fire and smoke and lightning and trumpets and earthquakes. Those are big moments, right? That, by the way, that's why we picked the book of Exodus. I've had fun with Dr. Summers and John Drury and Lakia Stewart as we've kind of shaped this whole thing. And in the words of Dr. John, the book of Exodus is like the blockbuster Marvel movie of the Old Testament. I mean, it's got all the action, it's got all the big scenes, right? I tried to get him to go with numbers, but that's a whole nother story. Yeah, there you go. But here, I mean, we get to the ending, and it's like they set up a tent. But the crazy thing is, God, who has been the major character in every one of those big scenes, the God from the top of the mountain, comes down. And his presence becomes their everyday that is going to go with them. We see that the tabernacle extends Sinai in their life. Or if we want to keep the Marvel reference, we could say if the book of Exodus has been the whole blockbuster Marvel movie, the end of Exodus that then leads us into Leviticus and Numbers are all the MCU spinoff shows. Okay? Like WandaVision and Hawkeye, all the things. For you Star Wars people, not to leave you out, this is The Mandalorian. What else? All the other ones. Boba Fett. Okay, all those. So we could say, like this is what super fans love, like to slow it all down and dig into the details and live with the characters. You can see why I like this ending, right? So we could say that the moment of the tabernacle serializes Sinai. It moves the story of God with his people from the blockbuster mountaintop moments into the day-by-day stream of life together. And I want to look a little bit at how that works. What do we see? If we look at chapter 40, verses 34 and 35, we see that the cloud comes down and the glory of the Lord fills. The cloud settles and the glory of the Lord fills. Well, if we go back to chapter 24, which was that first moment, the first moment when they got to Sinai, started at chapter 19 and goes through chapter 24. Look at what we saw there. The Lord said to Moses, "Come up to me on the mountain and stay here. And I will give you the tablets of stone and the law and commandments I have written for their instruction." When Moses went up on the mountain, the cloud covered it, and the glory of the Lord settled on Mount Sinai. For 6 days the cloud covered the mountain. And on the seventh day, the Lord called to Moses from within the cloud. To the Israelites, they were down at the bottom, remember? The glory of the Lord looked like a consuming fire on top of the mountain. Then Moses entered the cloud as he went on up the mountain. And he stayed on the mountain 40 days. And 40 nights. It's at the end of those 40 days and 40 nights that we had the whole golden calf scene last week. But right after that, he's up on the mountain, and right after that, chapter 25 says, "Have them construct a sanctuary for me, so that I may dwell among them." This is what God was already planning. He's going to come right down and live in their midst. We're going to see that their camp is going to surround the tabernacle. The tabernacle is going to be the very center of their lives. Do you remember how scared they were when they got to Sinai? They were like, "Moses, you go up there. We're going to stay back here." And now God's going to come right down in their midst because he's not going to stay far away where they can just kind of glimpse him. Do you see how they saw him from down where they were? Yeah, I think this God I think he's pretty much just like a consuming fire. I think that's what this God is. When he's far away like that and all we can do is glimpse him, we get the wrong view of God. And that takes us back to last week. Do you remember what we learned last week? We learned that in our brokenness, when I try to take my belief and get out of that, push out of that right behavior, it's not gonna work. That's the wilderness mindset, that scarcity mentality that's never gonna be enough. And it's gonna lead me back to where I am, and I'm gonna be looking around going, how did I get here? But what we saw in the Moses mindset, did we get that up there? I didn't see if it came up. But we saw in the Moses mindset is that what is going to change my brokenness is letting my belief move me to beholding God. That deep longing for his presence that cries out, show me your glory. We just sang about it. We just saw it. The glory of God. Moses cried that in chapter 33. But see, here's the thing. The Moses mindset only becomes possible for all the people in the tabernacle reality. God, who brought Moses up on the mountain to enter into his presence so he could behold him, now God comes down to be with all of them so they can live their lives beholding him close. Right? What we do is behold. What he does is come down to be with us. And what makes my beholding possible is that he comes down. There's got to be proximity, or I won't see right. Guys, God doesn't need the tabernacle. Isaiah 6, verse 1 says, just the very hem of his robe fills the whole temple. The temple replaced the tabernacle, and the temple was even bigger. I mean, it's not containing God. God doesn't need the tabernacle. We do. Because we need him close. This has always been the point. God delivers in order to dwell. And now he's going to live with them and move with them and guide their every step. When we go back to chapter 40, we see that when the presence of God is in their midst, if it doesn't move, they don't move. They only move when the presence of God moves. The end of Numbers 9, oh, it's so cool, go read it. The end of Numbers 9 tells us that sometimes the cloud would stay overnight and then they'd move again. Sometimes it would stay 2 days. Sometimes it would stay a month. Sometimes it would stay a year. And they waited. They didn't move until God moved. That kind of dwelling where God sets the rhythm of my every moment, of my every day and week and year. I move when he moves. Guys, God is dwelling with us, and the tabernacle serializes Sinai so that dwelling happens day by day. But I'm gonna be honest, even though I love this ending now, I've had a hard time with this ending in my life. And that is because somehow in the course of whatever things, I lived for a long time in this idea that God can't be in the presence of sin. I mean, that's why we needed to be forgiven and cleansed and washed whiter than snow and that kind of thing, because God can't be in the presence of sin. And for me, that always kept a distance with God, right? Because, if I got too close, I might contaminate him. But do you see how that is not the picture here? God comes close. Just a word of advice. Be careful to say God can't. Just that's my advice I learned from that. Okay, but God comes close here. We remember when Moses, up on the mountain, when Moses got drawn into God's presence. Do you remember what Andrea told us, that there was that whole weird light shooting out of his face thing, so that they had to cover it because they couldn't see it, because God's presence changes things. It's potent. It's powerful. This isn't just, me knocking on your door and saying, hey, can I come move in? I mean, this is something different. And if we go back to chapter 40, what we see in verse 35, I read it, but let's stop and think about it for a moment. The cloud comes down, the glory fills, and Moses can't enter. Wait, what? Moses, right? I mean, he's already been up on the mountain. He's already entered the cloud. The glory has literally radiated off his face. And Moses can't enter? Okay, this is the image I want to give you, and I want to play with here for just a minute. I want you to imagine God coming down as a really big magnet. Okay? And we're all little magnets. Here, the people there, we're all little magnets. And what do we know about when magnets come close to each other? They either attract or repel, right? So what we have to see is the orientation of my heart in my life of brokenness and that sinfulness that's just baked into who I am. The orientation of my heart is away from God. And so when this huge magnet that is God comes down, what's going to happen? I'm going to push away. And it's going to be me that's moving. This isn't a picture of God can't be in the presence of sin. No, exactly the opposite. It's sin can't be in the presence of God. It won't draw near. It won't dwell. It will push away. And guys, that's also exactly the reason why we can't say, God's all good with me. I mean, God and I, we're hanging out. He knows this is as good as I get. There's just some stuff that's just me, and God and I we got it worked out. Guys, we can't say that. My sin won't allow me to say that, because I won't draw near. I won't dwell with him. I may say that I am, but I'm not. If he's not changing me, it might be an indicator that I'm actually pushing away from him. If I don't want to come into those moments and those spaces and those places like this, places like his word, where I will encounter his presence, it might be indicating that my sin is pushing me away from God. Oh, but guys, this huge magnet is powerful. And if I will let it turn me toward him, it will draw me in. And see, that's the amazing thing here, guys, is that God is coming down. He sees me. He knows me. He knows all my flaws. He knows all the things, and he's coming down. And he's not going anywhere. But his presence, his love is so deep and is so strong. He's not just going to leave me in my brokenness. He's going to draw me. He's going to pull me in so that I don't stay in that condition of sin. That's not what I do, but it's just what I am without him. Look what he says in chapter 29, again, as he's telling us all about the tabernacle. He says in chapter 29, at the entrance to the tent of meeting, I will meet with the Israelites, and the place will be made holy by my glory. Your version might say, the place will be consecrated or sanctified. It just means it will be made holy by my glory. Then I will dwell among the Israelites and be their God. They will know that I am the Lord their God who brought them out of Egypt so that I might dwell with them. I might dwell among them. I am the Lord their God. See, when God dwells in me, when I dwell with him, when I allow him to reorient me and draw me into his presence, the space of my life is made holy by his glory, by his very presence. It's his presence that purifies. I can't contaminate God. His presence purifies me, and as I behold him, and as I am with him, experiencing that indescribable chesed love, that's what changes me. And it makes me into what he created me to be, who he created me to be, so that I live the life he created me to live. That's how the whole progression happens. The tabernacle doesn't just serialize God's presence among them so it goes with them. It magnetizes God's presence among them so that it changes them. But if I get back to chapter 40, by God demonstrating that not even Moses can come into his presence at that moment, he is first teaching his people the power of his presence. That your sin is not just going to allow you to waltz into the presence of God, but by coming down and staying with them, he is promising his presence to transform them, to transform their lives, to make all that he has for them come true. He's already told them how he created them to live, and we realize now that it is his presence that's going to make that happen. Guys, this is where this book has to end, because it completes this whole story. If we think back, we have the God of all eternity who sees his people in the state that they're in, and in his infinite, incomparable love, he comes down and he fights for them like a mama bear. Do you remember that part? And he delivers them from their bondage. He provides for their every need. He reveals the truth of who he is and all he desires for them, and he forgives them and never stops loving them, even in the face of their rejection of him. And all of that is to be with them, to dwell with them, so that his presence can change them so that they can be with him. That's the God he is. If that story sounded familiar, you've been listening to Exodus. Good job. But we see it's not just their story. It's not just that story for them back then. You might have heard another story that you know. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. That made his dwelling word, it's not just the plain word for living, dwelling, abiding, some of those other words we use. Some translations say the Word became flesh and tabernacled among them, set up his tent among us. And we have seen his glory in the person of Jesus Christ. Do you hear the same story? The God of all eternity looked down and saw his creation. He saw his people in the state we were in, and he came down to dwell with us. And what did Jesus do? The same thing that we saw in Exodus. He taught people, he taught them how he created us to live, and he dwelled with people. He ate with tax collectors and sinners. He touched lepers, and what happened? Their lives were changed. Individuals were changed. The world was changed. And we also saw in his dwelling those who pushed away from him and would not let him turn them toward him. This is what happens when God's presence comes down. And he continued the story, right? On the cross, he fought for us and he delivered us from our bondage of sin, and he forgives us even when we reject him. We sang about the veil. At the moment of his death, the moment when he won the battle for my soul against sin, the veil of the temple, which is what the tabernacle had become, was torn in two from top to bottom, demonstrating the full release of God's presence, the unleashing of the powerful presence of God in this world. And then there's Easter, when he rises again. Guys, the story of the Exodus without the tabernacle is like Jesus' life and death without the resurrection, because that's always the point. God coming to live with us so that his presence can change us as we behold him. It's the kind of God he is. Exodus is the first time we get to see the whole story, but God has been telling this story over and over again. And the ending of Exodus is also the ending of all human history. Look at Revelation 21 with me. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea. And I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride, beautifully dressed for her husband. And I heard a loud voice from the throne saying, "Look, God's dwelling place, his tabernacle, is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. They will be his people, and God himself will be with them and be their God." And it goes on in verse 23, "The city does not need the sun or the moon to shine on it, for the glory of God gives it light, and the Lamb, Jesus Christ himself, is the lamp." Guys, it's the whole story. I love this ending because I can see every step of the way. And it's his story not just for them, not just for those that Jesus encountered, it's his story for you. Jesus prayed for you. And in John 17, he shows us his heart for us. "Father, I want," this is what Jesus says, "I want those you have given me to be with me where I am and to see my glory, the glory you have given me because you loved me before the creation of the world." Do you see what Jesus wants for you? To be with him and to behold him. That's what Exodus teaches us. Will you dwell with this God, and will you let this be your story? I'm going to let you pronounce the benediction with me. We're going to speak these words of Jesus. if we put it back up there from John 17, but where it says, those you have given me, I want you to put in your name. So it'll sound like, I want Elaine to be with me, right? So we're gonna say this together. I want you to replace those words with your name, and I want you to hear the words of Jesus over you. Say it with me. Father, I want Elaine to be with me where I am and to see my glory, the glory you have given me because you loved me before the creation of the world. Go and be with the God who dwells.